Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Duke, and this is The Takeaway. Glad to be back again with our correspondent, Alex Newman. And we talk a lot about educational issues on The Takeaway, and we're back at it today. In past episodes, we've talked a little bit about psychosocial education, but things are really getting bad now. Alex, talk a little bit about your new article on psychological profiling of kids in schools.
Oh, well, thanks very much, Duke. And, the thing that's becoming obvious now is that this is so out of control. Even the people who monitor this, even the people who try to track this explosion of psychological testing and psychological manipulation under the guise of education are having trouble keeping up. And that should really tell people something, that even the professionals who are trying to stay on top of this cannot keep track of how quickly, how far out, how dramatic this is all expanding.
Give us a list for moms and dads at home. We know that not only is this a psychological privacy issue, you've got unqualified teachers, you've got generic tests now that are probing kids in very unscientific ways. You've also got all of that psychological data being gathered and dumped in kids' data files, which means much of this attitudinal research, these forays into kids, monitoring kids' attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs, that's going to follow them in the rest of their lives in some kind of a national database. But before we move to that, give a couple examples, Alex, for a mom and dad at home who doesn't understand how are they using school testing, how are they using the classroom to find out psychological data and report it on kids.
Well, there's all kinds of different tools that they're using. A lot of the assessments that they're using now, the National Education Assessment, it's called the Nation's Report Card, for example. They're inserting all kinds of things to try to figure out children's attitudes, children's beliefs, children's values. Same thing with Common Core, right? All kinds of different Common Core programs and related assessments and curricular materials are embedding all of this stuff within it. You're absolutely right, Duke, that this is all going into the permanent files of these kids, right, for future use and exploitation by whatever supercomputers are developed, artificial intelligence. And you really have in the education bureaucracy, in Washington, D.C., this mindset that, well, if we just have all this data on students, we'll be able to really centrally plan the economy, right? We'll know, if this student will be a good fit for a janitor job, this student will be a good fit, maybe for higher education. This one has displayed the right values. They're totally loyal to the LGBT agenda and, all the rest of the required talking points. And so we'll let them go on to college. And that's the direction that this is all heading in. And again, there's all kinds of different venues and avenues through which this data is being gathered. In some cases, the teachers are being asked to fill it out. In fact, a few weeks ago at the Newman Report, we talked about how teachers in New Hampshire were being asked to fill out these surveys once a month on children, tracking their mental health and their psychological profiles. And a lot of it was just really invasive stuff having to do with their worldview and how they think and how they feel. And then, it expands from there. The assessments, the state-mandated, federally mandated assessments now are going into this area called social and emotional learning, right? It's psychological babble and silliness, but it's being gathered at a tremendous rate, and this is going to have lifelong implications for these kids that I think at the moment we can't even fathom what those might be. But you can be 100% sure that unless all this data is destroyed, and there's no indication that that's going to happen, right now it's going into these databases, it is going to be used against you.
It's a great point, and I want moms and dads to be very, very, very clear about this. When you hear your schools talking about career readiness, when you hear them talking about planning career paths for your kids, this sounds like a great idea, but it's not what you think it is. This is not preparing your kids to do really great work at math so that they become accountants. It's not preparing your kids to understand science at high levels so they can walk right into a career in engineering. No, this is about using data to manipulate where your kids end up. And a lot of it has to do, much more alarming than even the college and career-ready aspects of this, which are shocking, is what Alex just said, the social engineering of your kids. They are trying to assess your kids' attitudes. What do they believe? What religious beliefs do they bring from the home? What are their attitudes towards sexuality, towards marriage, towards politics, towards government, towards the role of the state versus the role of the individual? And what's happening here in short order, it's already beginning to happen in our schools. Kids whose psychological profiles and social profiles reflect a conservative agenda or a religious agenda. They're now the prime candidates for reassignment. They're the ones now who are being deemed somehow outside of the norm. And interventions are being planned for these kinds of kids in the same way you would have interventions for kids who are diagnosed as being dyslexic, right?
That's exactly right. And, they talk a lot about interventions and modifications, right? So that you have, on the one hand, you have this kind of behavioral conditioning, right? And this has been going on for 100 years. These behavioral psychologists thinking that humans are just slightly more complex animals. And if you just provide the right rewards and stimulus and punishments, that you can kind of condition them as if they were a circus animal. So there's a lot of that going on. And, people need to think about this. Is your child just a circus animal to be trained and conditioned to have the right attitudes? And the right attitudes, of course, as defined by government, right? And if you've been paying any attention to the news these last few days, you realize that the government probably doesn't share the same attitudes as regular, everyday, mom and pop America. And so we're entering into, as I say in my article, a brave new world here. This is literally without precedent in human history. Nothing like this has ever happened because simply it just wasn't feasible technologically. You now have schemes being developed to monitor children's brain waves and their emotions to see how they react to things that the teacher says. And this is all, they're harvesting millions and millions and millions of data points on these children. And, right now they probably can't make use of too much of it, but computing power is increasing so quickly. Artificial intelligence is right around the corner. This stuff is going to have tremendous life-changing implications for your children. And so I say you need to protect your kids, and that means getting them out of the system as quickly as you can. I mean, imagine a school building on fire. That's how serious you need to take this. Grab your kid and run as far as you can from this kind of stuff. And secondly, we can't forget about the kids who are stuck there, and we need to do our best to try to put a lid on this stuff and stop letting it happen.
It's great stuff. It's good that you're here with us again, and we did a show like this a couple weeks ago. We have to keep pushing this. All of this is under the umbrella of Common Core, by the way. Common Core didn't invent this stuff, but Common Core provided, and we've been saying this for years, Alex, Common Core provided the cover, if you will. It provided the Trojan horse. Through which, while we were all paying attention to this standard and that nasty book that was being read, what was really going on was the consolidation of all of this educational power at the federal level. We've mentioned on this show many times through the ESSA Act how Republicans cemented that control in Washington, where it never should have been, and there's no constitutional principle for it being. And so here we are now in a situation where, if you want to protect your kids, Alex is right. Keeping them in the public schools is almost an impossible solution if you want to keep your kids from being exposed to this kind of stuff.
That's exactly right. They're gathering this data on every child that is in a government school right now. They want to expand it to reach out to private schools. They want to expand it out to homeschoolers. And we absolutely must resist this agenda. This is just incredibly Orwellian. I mean, Orwell could not have imagined this kind of stuff in his worst nightmares. And, even if you like President Trump, or even if you liked President Obama, what's going to happen when the next guy comes along, or the next one after that? Do you want them having access to the most intimate thoughts of your child for the rest of their lives in deciding their career path and all the rest of it? Think through the implications of this and realize that we probably can't even possibly understand all the implications yet because of how quickly this is all moving. And, once that data is in that database, it's not coming out of there. So you need to take all this into account as you consider what to do with the future of your children and your grandchildren and your nieces and your nephews and all the other kids in your life that you love.
Alex, thank you for another great takeaway. And you can see all of our videos, articles, and conversations at FreedomProject.com. If you enjoyed this video and all of our videos, please consider a tax-deductible donation so we can keep the whole thing free for you. I'm Dr. Duke. Thanks for watching.